Hello there everyone, today I'm going to be reading from Codex of the Infinite Planes, an essential guide to the planes of existence. This volume is The Plane of Faerie, written and designed by Weird Dave Coulson and available on the DM's Guild. The Plane of Faerie, sometimes referred to as the Feywild, is a vibrant echo of the material plane, and in this it is similar to the Plane of Shadow, along with the Plane of Dreams. These echo planes coexist with the material plane, highlighting and accentuating different aspects, and for the Feywild, life, nature, and its various dangers are pushed to extreme levels. The seasons are varied and static, changing from one to another in stark contrast in varying regions, and the capricious archfey that rule over all have their own petty squabbles and political discourse. Lost relics and overgrown ruins of ancient primordial elven people litter the Feywild, but travellers should be warned that rarely are these treasures left unprotected. That's a quote from Lilandry, the Moon Mage. On the other side of a thin planar barrier surrounding the material plane sits a place of wonder and beauty, terror and darkness, hope and fear. It is the realm of ancient archfey and powerful elves from times long since past, where the seasons stand frozen at the whim of bickering fey courts. This is the Plane of Faerie, also known as the Feywild, and is a place of terrible beauty and glittering shadows. Like the Plane of Shadow and the Plane of Dreams, the Plane of Faerie is also an echo of the material plane, sitting like an overlay over the entire plane. Most people do not know it exists, though in certain areas known as ley lines, the border becomes blurred, and in other regions, spontaneous gates and portals open up, allowing free travel between the two. Capricious fey creatures, from sprites and pixies to hags and quicklings, populate the realm. Many owe allegiance to one of the fairy courts, including the Summer Court, the Gloaming Court, and the Winter Court, but not all do, and some actively work against the powerful archfey that rule these powerful organisations. Fey are not the only inhabitants of the Plane of Faerie. Long ago, a race of giants pierced the planar veil and marched a mighty army through, with intents to conquer the lush and bountiful land. They were not successful, and for their transgressions they were cursed. These Fomorians lurk in the darkness and shadows of the Feywild now, striking against all native creatures with as much power as they can muster, and their ruined fortresses still dot the landscape. The Plane of Faerie is a place of natural danger, where the weather can turn deadly with no warning, and the beasts of the forest prey on travellers with malice and hunger in their hearts. Time is a strange thing in the Feywild as well, and some travellers that leave find that more or less time has passed since when they left. For immortal fey creatures this isn't a problem, but mortal, short-lived creatures can find their lives wasting away the instant they leave. This is one of the many reasons travellers to the Plane of Faerie end up staying. There's also an intoxicating flavour that permeates the plane, and for non-fey it can prove an addicting experience. It's difficult to describe. The air is thicker, more alive, and all the scents and aromas are enhanced 100-fold. Beyond this olfactory enhancement, the very land of the Feywild is lush and vibrant, filled with life and beauty. But there's always a trick in the Plane of Faerie. Sometimes a verdant forest clearing dappled with pure sunlight turns mortals into gold, as is known to happen in the Golden Glade, while in the vast swamp known as the Merkendraw, creeping yellow vines obey the commands of the hag covens that fill the region, choking and pulling down travellers. Treasures abound in the Plane of Faerie as well, relics from ancient kingdoms of primordial elves known as the Eladrin. The Sceptre of Starlight, the Diamond Staff, and the Leaves of All Seasons all originated from the Feywild and have found their way across the multiverse at one point or another. Yet they always seem to find their way back to the Plane of Faerie. The basic geography of the Plane of Faerie is an echo of the material plane, at least in rough shape. The further one travels from a freight crossing or portal, the more varied the landscape becomes. But when the two planes become more in sync, the spontaneous crossings appear. These usually occur in out-of-the-way places, where a bit of the magic and wonder of the Feywild crosses over into the material plane to create a magical, if temporary, bridge. Seasons and the sun's cycle can vary widely. However, geographic regions across the Plane of Faerie are frozen in a season's particular grasp, usually summer or winter. This holds true for the position of the moon and the sun. Some areas never see the sun dimming, while others are bathed forever in moonlight. The borders between these regions can be extreme. A group of travellers may enter the Feywild in a summer-filled forest where the sun never sets, and while exploring come across a mountain range, frozen in winter's fury where the moon hangs high and full in the sky at all times. It is natural to connect these extreme seasonal changes and day-moon phases to the powerful archfey that rule much of the Feywild, but the truth is that only few of the mightiest exert any real influence over the plane itself on such a grand scale. The Queen of the Summer Court has been known to change a region from winter to summer or night to day, but these events are rare and usually catastrophic for the natural beings who have taken up residence in the affected area. Locally, however, the mood of most powerful denizens of the particular small area can affect the surroundings in minor ways, such as gathering of storm clouds and the movement of brambles, or the rushing of rivers with no apparent outlet. Below the ground in the Plane of Faerie twists an endless maze of brightly lit tunnels known as the Feydark. It is a mirror of the Underdark on the material plane, but a natural light, akin to that of a star, infuses the stone and prevents total darkness from blanketing any large subterranean realm. Foul things dwell in the Feydark, but the twisted Fomorians, cursed by the Archfey for their transgressions long ago to goblins and other unsavoury beings, can be found there. There are regions beyond the strong seasonal variations of summer and winter, known as the Wildlands. Clouds fill the twilight sky in these areas, and dark and twisted things fester outside the domains of the Archfey. Some planar scholars say that the Wildlands are what the Plane of Faerie would be like without the influence of the Fey, and it is held back only by the combined will of the courts. Sometimes the Wildlands breach the barrier between the planes and encroach upon the material plane, creating an overgrown, tangled nightmare that threatens all creatures. Time is a strange thing on the Plane of Faerie. The sun does not set if it is risen, and the moon does not wax while it is in the air. Time passes normally for creatures in the Feywild, though it can be difficult to mark its passage considering the unusual and stagnant cycles of day and night in the seasons. Leaving the Plane of Faerie, however, is when time can catch up to a non-native suddenly. There's nothing inherently violent or threatening in the landscape of the Plane of Faerie, or at least nothing that permeates the entire plane. Winter regions are cold, and unprotected travellers can certainly succumb to the elements as if they're in a normal winter setting if they're not prepared, but this is typically no worse than winter in the prime material plane. Some specific regions of the Feywild do have more localised threats that travellers should be wary of, however. As an echo plane, the Plane of Faerie exists simultaneously with the prime material plane, which can make passing between the two surprising and sometimes frequent. There are differences between the two, sometimes wildly different, but when particular geographic environmental features line up, a temporary gateway can open up, and this is referred to as a crossing, a Fey crossing specifically, and can last anywhere from minutes to days. Fey crossings are two-way portals within the Plane of Faerie and the material plane, allowing denizens of both planes to travel over into the other. Oftentimes a wicked archfey or powerful hag follow the signs of the Feywild and watch for these events to occur, timing their plans and schemes to coincide with the appearance of a Fey crossing. Some of these plans involve conquest, just as often it's to escape a curse or other magical detriment the Fey crossing bypasses. Portals and gates exist that lead to the Plane of Faerie as well, notably Bitopia, the Beastlands, and Elysium in the Outer Planes contain many portals leading to the Feywild, allowing the good-aligned and often Fey-aligned denizens of those planar regions and destinations to travel and trade freely with the Archfey and their fickle courts. The ethereal plane contains numerous colour curtains that lead directly to the Plane of Faerie as well, and some planar travellers have found colour pools in the astral plane that can transport them directly to the realm of the Fey. In the material plane, a gate may exist to the Plane of Faerie under specific circumstances. For example, when morning sun pierces a halo of verdant leaves in an ancient forest, the shimmering haze may just be a one-way portal to the Feywild. Dormant gates have been activated by the possession of a certain type of leaf or forest berry, or by singing the correct incantation honouring the ancient elves who founded many of the great cities of the Plane of Faerie. Travelling within the Plane of Faerie is unimpeded by any natural planar effect or hazard. Daylight dazzles brilliantly, and even regions blanketed by night are usually illuminated by an unnaturally large moon. Summer regions are the easiest to travel, and winter-dominated sections are no more difficult to travel than particularly cold or snowy geographies of the material plane. Weather effects can be fierce and dramatic, however, but these do not follow predictable or even logical patterns. Instead, the weather of a region of the Plane of Faerie is dictated by the whims of the most powerful archfey in the region. Cloudless skies with light breezes are usually the result of a content or happy archfey, but raging storms with driving rain and howling blizzards or other extreme effects can spin up suddenly and without warning. Powerful archfey, wicked hags, twisted Fomorian kings, and more lurk in the Plane of Faerie, each with their agenda and plots. Some of these plots involve invasion. Some heroes would be wise to learn all they can about the movers and shakers of the Feywild before they blunder into a castle belonging to someone much more powerful than they are. Hags are as much of the Plane of Faerie as any other of the Fey creatures. They are typically solitary beings, owing loyalty to themselves or a small group of sisterly hags known as a coven. But in the vast swamp known as Merkendraw, the most powerful and wicked of the hags of all the Feywild have combined forces and formed the Blighted Mothers, a particularly ruthless coven that demands fealty from all other hags. There are 4 hags in the Blighted Mothers, each representing a different type commonly encountered on the Plane of Faerie. Mother Brona is an Anis hag. Mother Blagovesta is a Bear hag. Mother Zabnia is a Sea hag, and Mother Vaklava is a Green hag. The Blighted Mothers work in the deepest, darkest heart of the Merkendraw, and they honour the greatest hag of all time, Baba Yaga. In her name, the 4 have performed terrible atrocities across the Feywild and beyond. They have networks of spies and informants from the courts of the Archfey to the most influential nobles of the material plane. Nothing moves in the Merkendraw without the Blighted Mothers knowing about it. Also, it's whispered. And they are known to cast their spirits far and wide to oversee the plots and schemes of their minions personally. What do the Blighted Mothers want? Well, their motives seem rooted in spreading chaos and disorder in the name of Baba Yaga as far and wide as possible. But the 4 hags do not always see eye to eye, and they occasionally work against one another. Direct conflict is forbidden by Baba Yaga's ancient decree, but the Blighted Mothers will still use their pawns to thwart or delay the plans of other hags in the coven in a sort of arcane Cold War. But when they are united, such as to recover a stolen item or to fulfill some obscure prophecy, their powers are formidable and their wills are like iron. Great swaths of the great Plane of Faerie are under the direct influence of powerful archfey, fey beings of enormous power and age. Some are noble, some are wicked, some of them obey ancient traditions of the Feywild that organise their powers into distinct courts. These are the 4 primary courts: the Court of Summer, the Court of Winter, the Court of Green, and the Court of Coral. A 5th, the Gloaming Court, was cast out originally for crimes against the Feywild, but it remains an influential and important member of the balance of power. The Court of Summer is ruled by Queen Titania, arguably the most powerful archfey in the entire plane, and her powers are near infinite while on the Plane of Faerie. She's amused by the actions of mortal creatures, and often sends her agents to bring specimens back from material planes to act and cavort for her and her attendees, but her wrath when crossed is deadly, and her moods can shift suddenly and without warning. Queen Titania rules from Sinalies, a city built within towering silver trees. The Gloaming Court is ruled by the Queen of Air and Darkness, whose real name has been lost to time. She commands legions of unseelie fairies to do her bidding, and she has engaged in a lifelong cat-and-mouse game with the Queen of Titania in the Court of Summer. Sometimes the Queen of Air and Darkness is able to convince one of the other Archfey courts to ally with her, especially the Court of Winter, which often finds the needs aligned with that of the Gloaming Court. Truces and pacts among the Archfey are fleeting at best, however, and these alliances rarely last more than a few decades. The Courts of Green, Winter and Coral do not have dedicated leaders, but they count many powerful Archfey among their members. Rarely do these lesser courts convene together, as the individuals hold more sway over local forces and regions, but Queen Titania has called on the courts together several times to discuss matters of importance that affect all of the Feywild. Unseating the Gloaming Court and the casting out of the Queen of Air and Darkness were one of these times. All of the courts and many of the independent Archfey operate across the multiverse through the actions of proxies and agents. Some of these agents are warlocks dedicated to the power of the Archfey, while others are simply mortals caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Oftentimes, the communicated desires of their patron to a Fey agent make little sense, such as moving a certain stone in a certain place several feet in a single direction. There's always meaning in these actions, however. It just requires a level of perspective that most mortals do not possess. Long ago, a force of giants entered the Plane of Faerie with dreams of conquest. The Fomorians back then were beautiful and powerful in magic. They pushed into the Feywild through fairy crossings and forced gates that they established several strongholds within to fortify their positions. The greatest and most complete of these was the fortress city known as Magtere, and from there the giants struck out against the Archfey with murderous intent. Ultimately, however, the giants were defeated, but the Archfey were not content to simply cast out the invaders. They cursed the entire race, turning them into hideously twisted Fomorians, spreading madness among their ranks. Magtere, once a beacon of conquest, was cast down deep into the Feydark. It's an interesting place. It's made up of huge sheets of iron moulded. Practical, but there's a beauty in that practicality. And it now sits, ironically, above a nexus of portals to different worlds located in the Feydark. The Fomorian king has always ruled Magtere since, but each has been afflicted with madness and insanity that seems to far outstrip the rest of their kind. The current ruler is King Jarhild, and he is determined to master the network of portals that exist below Magtere. Fortunately for the material plane, Jarhild's faculties are fleeting and his mind scattered, so he continually seeks to find the same passages. Over the years, the Fomorian presence in Magtere has been reduced, but other sinister and evil forces still lurk within the fortress city's walls and tunnels, but King Jarhild is concerned with none of that. Fairy dragons are native beings of the Feywild, and they claim to be the first and oldest creatures of the entire plane. How much this is true is unknown. This type of boasting is not uncommon with fairy dragons, so few pay them any heed, but there is one that might just prove it all to be true. Tasmira is the oldest fairy dragon in the multiverse, and she rules as the de facto queen of the fairy dragons on the plane of Faerie. Her memory is long and flawless, but unlike many of her kind, her arrogance and pride do not cloud her judgment. Tasmira is interested in only two things: keeping her subjects safe and protecting the treasure hoard of her people. For years, Tasmira has been the custodian of a great treasure hoard, representing the accumulated wealth of all fairy dragons everywhere. It's rumoured that any time a fairy dragon gains treasure, a portion is given over to the collected hoard through ancient magic, and the gathered wealth has become quite legendary among certain seekers and adventurers. Tasmira and a small contingent of local fairy dragons are the only ones that know the location of this fabulous treasure, but it hasn't stopped them from being hunted down. To this end, the fairy dragon queen and her loyal subjects move from place to place within the Feywild and elsewhere, sometimes even crossing into the material plane, never settling in one location for too long. Their forced exile is necessary to protect the wealth of their people, but it wears on Tasmira that she cannot just find a home for the fairy dragons. Stars are a funny thing on the plane of Faerie. These regions that are blanketed with darkness have skies filled with stars, but they are not the same stars as seen in the night sky of the material plane. These stars, it is said, are the spirits of powerful beings that have died in the Feywild and been ascended to pure light. This may be true for some of the lights in the night sky, but the cult of the Star Children believe that there is more up there than meets the eye. The Star Children believe the night sky is the plane of Faerie that opens up to a place of madness and utter chaos known as the Far Realm, and that some of these stars are actually openings between the planes. The Far Realm exists outside the accepted boundaries of the multiverse, also most planet scholars believe, and it is an alien realm home to beings that operate on completely different levels of existence, mentally and physically. Most cannot even exist outside the Far Realm, but the Star Children claim to have seen and communicated with these entities through the holes in the Feywild night sky. Followers of the Star Children are patient and thoroughly malevolent, waiting in their twisted citadel for the day when the stars are right and the Far Realm can invade the plane of Faerie once and for all. Membership in the cult requires undergoing secret ceremonies. The most prominent results with the hollowing out of the members' eyes and replacing them with blackened nothingness. Most Star Children can disguise this unfleeting feature for a period of time to blend in with others, but in their citadel their madness and cruelty hold supreme. The greatest cities on the plane of Faerie belong to the courts of the Archfey, with each member of the court holding sway over a castle, a refuge, or an individual site. The leaders of each rule from sprawling cities that have become beacons across the Feywild. Queen Titania of the Summer Court rules from Sinalies, a city built in the boughs of towering silver trees, the likes of which have never been seen elsewhere in the multiverse. Rope elevators lead guests honoured enough to be invited to Queen Titania's home up into the heights of the treetops, where the true breathtaking beauty of Sinalies is beheld. The city is constructed of delicate crystal stone that blends naturally and effortlessly into the silver trees, creating a sense of otherworldly wonder. Lord Oren of the Green Court rules from Lestre, a city that has become nearly engulfed by the howling forest around it. The transition has been natural and harmonious, with more and more of the city's once elegant stone streets and pavements becoming forested woodland instead. It was claimed by Lord Oren as his home for its peaceful quality, and he does nothing to stem the flow of the howling forest. It's rumoured that Lestre was once a material plane city that was transported into the Plane of Faerie by some ancient elven magic, but that was long before Lord Oren took over the place. The Winter Court's greatest archfey, the Prince of Frost, rules from beneath a titanic mountain of crystal-clear ice called the Summit of Star. Cathrius, the city of the ice moon, sprawling beneath the mountain's peak where night reigns supreme. The brilliant moon and star-filled sky provide ample illumination for the Prince of Frost's court, who take time to regally gaze out through the icy mountain's clear exterior and into the wild night beyond. Elias and Siaban Illustri are the archfey twins that rule the court of Coral, and they command the smallest of the archfey cities. The Lake of Dreams is a deep body of water that pulls in currents from the twin rivers Azur and Cerulean, creating a natural whirlpool in the centre that constantly draws objects and creatures to the bottom. There, the city of Sheila Dothor sits at the bottom, with the Coral Court commanding the lake, current, and surrounding regions. Sheila Dothor is constructed of multicoloured coral crystals naturally harvested from the bed of the Lake of Dreams. The Queen of Air and Darkness rules the Gloaming Court from no city, but she and her kin once held the city of Cendrillon as their home. When the other archfey courts cast them out, Cendrillon fell into ruin and has since become the home of numerous evil creatures, including drow, spiders, and a powerful elven vampire. Each of these wondrous cities holds a common feature. They do not allow visitors unless explicitly invited. The archfey are capricious and follow their own strict sense of morals and honours. But one of the threads learned by planar sages is a disdain for mortals that do not follow these protocols. Accessing the greatest lords and ladies of the Plane of Faerie requires no small amount of courtesy for those that seek an audience with them, for one reason or another. These are immortals. They have plenty of time to develop all manner of different mores and customs. Senalies, Lestre, Cathrius, and Shale Dothore are the greatest cities of the Archfey, each holding the most powerful and influential members of the courts that rule much of the Plane of Faerie. These cities are off limits to strangers. So few have laid eyes upon them that they're largely unknown. However, a stark contrast to that policy, the Autumn City of Mithrandain welcomes all travellers from across the plains to its forested halls. Long ago, the Court of Spring held as much influence as the others, but their leader found the bickering and infighting among the Archfey to be more and more distasteful. King Eberron wished to open up the Plane of Faerie to more trade and exchange ideas with other powerful races across the multiverse. This view was not shared by any of the other Archfey, so Eberron broke tradition and disbanded the Court of Spring and opened the gates of his fair city of Mithrandain to the world, or many worlds. In doing so, the City of Spring transformed overnight into the Autumn City, and Eberron has ruled it ever since. Mithrandain is built in the boughs of the treetops within the Sunset Forest. Like most ancient elven cities, it is a beauty to behold, but unlike others, King Eberron welcomes travellers to Mithrandain. One quirk of the city and its leader is its timeless nature. Eberron has a deep hatred for time, and does everything he can to ensure that no one notices and sees the passage of time within the city. Magical wards ensure timekeeping devices and methods simply do not function. In recent years, King Eberron's forces have been occupied with a growing connection between the Sunset Forest to the Feydark. He has seen numerous expeditions to cleanse the tunnels of goblins and Fomorians in order to keep Mithrandain safe, and so far his efforts have kept travellers and his people safe. Eberron is loath to ask for help from any other Archfey, most of whom have shunned him and his ways anyway, so he often turns to outside help to deal with these threats. And that is a brief foray into the Feywild. There are many other aspects. There's additional monsters and different character class options and magical items and locations and random roll encounter tables, and different aspects for different tiers of play that are available in this webbook for you. Much to draw upon, but I thought I would dip into the text there and just show you what the Codex of the Infinite Planes is really like. Thanks for listening, everyone.